Deep within the thermal layers of the Persian Gulf, the year 2026 hosts a kinetic chessboard of unprecedented density and lethal strategic complexity. Pentagon strategists, sequestered in windowless command rooms, project an aura of total confidence as they track the arrival of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The CVN-77 represents the absolute apex of the sanitized surgical doctrine, deploying the F-35C Lightning II as its primary instrument of aerial dominance. This fifth-generation platform is meticulously engineered to exploit the electromagnetic spectrum, reducing its massive radar cross-section to the size of a marble. The official military brief claims that regional airspace is now permanently locked down by this invisible and interconnected sensor grid of digital ghosts. On the sun-scorched Arabian Peninsula, the 494th Fighter Squadron stages its F-15E Strike Eagles at Al Dhafra, ready for high-intensity sustained combat operations. These aging but lethal airframes are designated as bomb trucks, capable of hauling 23,000 pounds of precision-guided ordnance across vast desert distances. The spreadsheet logic of modern warfare pairs these high-altitude ghosts with low-altitude brute force to achieve a theoretical and clean strategic checkmate. Global media outlets broadcast this specific formation as an impenetrable deterrent shield designed to suppress and contain any rational state-level adversary. However, the analysts at Navy Decoded ignore the glossy press releases to run a cold, objective maritime logistics stress test on the formation. Under the crushing weight of regional geography, the sustainment logic of this specific carrier air wing reveals a deep and structural strategic fracture. The F-15E Strike Eagle remains the undisputed king of the open sky, but is fundamentally a slave to the integrity of miles of concrete. These heavy, high-performance platforms require specialized runways with a pavement classification number exceeding 85 RBWT to operate safely at maximum combat weight. In the hyperkinetic theater of 2026, a 10,000-foot fixed concrete runway is no longer an asset, but a massive and static bullseye. Iranian ballistic doctrine, specifically the solid-fuel Segil-2 missile, is engineered for the immediate and total denial of enemy runway infrastructure across the region. A coordinated salvo of Mach 14 warheads renders Al Udeid's pristine concrete runways completely unusable within the first chaotic hour of any major engagement. Without intact pavement, the Strike Eagle becomes a multi-million-dollar museum exhibit frozen in the sand, unable to contribute to the air war. This immediate loss shifts the entire strategic burden of regional defense back to the floating, mobile deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier survives the initial ballistic onslaught because it remains a moving, unpredictable variable within the vast and chaotic equation of the ocean. However, the Lincoln relies entirely on the F-35C, a platform bound by unforgiving geometric constraints to maintain its vital stealth signature in combat. To maintain very low observable status, all munitions must be sequestered within internal weapon bays to prevent reflecting enemy radar pulses. Basic physics dictates that these internal bays can accommodate only two 2,000-pound GBU 31J dams per individual sortie, limiting the strike's total mass. The stealth platform is effectively a high-tech sniper rifle, designed to precisely decapitate a radar site or a high-value command and control node. But a sniper rifle, no matter how accurate, cannot halt a heavy mechanized division or a swarm of hundreds of fast attack craft. The F-35C fundamentally lacks the magazine depth required to systematically dismantle the industrial infrastructure or the sustained military capacity of a nation-state. In a high-intensity war of attrition, calculations show the Lincoln will exhaust its entire stockpile of specialized stealth munitions by day 7. The Air Force runs out of usable runway in the first hour. The Navy runs out of internal bay volume by the first week. The United States does not need another fragile miracle jet covered in expensive radar-absorbent coating that requires climate-controlled hangars to survive. The fleet requires a ghost from the Atlantic, a vessel capable of absorbing immense punishment while delivering overwhelming, sustained kinetic mass to the target. Steaming east from Norfolk with its transponders silent, the variable X that the Pentagon kept in reserve begins its long-range transit. The USS George H.W. Bush, CVN-77, enters the theater with its lights doused, intentionally bypassing the standard media cycles of the Mediterranean. Official channels dismiss its movement as a routine training rotation to mask its true tactical purpose from regional adversaries and satellite surveillance. The cold math of the Persian Gulf demands that CVN-77 close the widening logistics gap created by the limitations of stealth-centric warfare. This carrier brings a specific capability the Lincoln fundamentally lacks: the delivery of raw, unadulterated tonnage against a peer-level industrial adversary. It bears the name of the only American president shot down in naval combat who managed to survive against all historical odds. That specific survival DNA is metallurgically burned into every inch of the high-tensile steel of the ship's 3,000-ton keel. Its official call sign is Avenger, a direct and historical nod to the TBM Avenger torpedo bomber flown by Bush in 1944. While its warrior soul is perfect, the physical body of CVN-77 is undeniably broken and plagued by legacy engineering failures from its construction. It is the black sheep of the fleet, the 10th and final hull of the Nimitz-class production line, built during a period of transition. CVN-77 is a mutant transitional platform, trapped between the proven engineering of the past and the experimental physics of the future. It fights a congenital list, a permanent and frustrating tendency to roll to the starboard side due to internal weight distribution errors. Naval engineers performed corrective surgery by welding massive blocks of raw pig iron into the portside voids to balance the vessel's center of gravity. This is parasitic mass, hundreds of tons of dead weight serving only to keep the ship upright in the water, dragging on its efficiency. It is a heavy linebacker wearing lead ankle weights just to stay balanced during the most important championship game of its career. Why would the Pentagon deploy this Frankenstein vessel to the world's most dangerous and volatile maritime choke point in a time of crisis? Because when the pristine runways of the desert burn, you do not need aesthetic perfection. You need durability and the ability to strike back. If the Lincoln is the surgical scalpel picking the lock, then CVN-77 is the heavy sledgehammer designed to kick down the front door. To understand its complex hydrodynamics, one must analyze the massive, bulbous bow, protruding significantly beneath the waterline of the ship's forward section. This feature, borrowed from commercial supertankers, leverages destructive interference to cancel the primary bow wave as the ship moves through the sea. By flattening the water surface, the design significantly reduces hydrodynamic drag, allowing the massive carrier to maintain high speeds with less reactor effort. Scan upward to the superstructure, where the island has been aggressively shrunk and shifted aft to minimize its radar return profile. Gone are the spinning, distinct radar antennas that define the chaotic Nimitz silhouette for 50 years of naval dominance. They are replaced by a sleek composite mass designed to absorb and diffuse incoming X-band energy from enemy search radars. Even the bridge windows are angled specifically to deflect enemy radar pulses directly into the absorbing sea rather than back to the source. These features do not render the carrier invisible, but they drastically shrink its detection radius in a contested environment. This reduced signature forces the enemy to close the distance, entering the escort's lethal envelope to get a firing solution. But the true weapon of CVN-77 is not the ship itself, but the specific composition of Carrier Air Wing 7. While the Lincoln hosts the F-35C, the Bush's deck is stacked with battle-hardened and upgraded F-A-18 Super Hornets. To an amateur, this appears as a technological downgrade. To a logistician, it is the only viable solution for sustained combat. The F-35C must fly in a clean configuration with no external stores to maintain its vital stealth geometry. Conversely, the Super Hornets operate in the double ugly configuration, utilizing every external hardpoint to maximize payload delivery. They do not carry 2 bombs, they carry 10, transforming into high-capacity delivery systems for a mass strike. The Super Hornet hauls the heavyweight ordnance that the F-35 simply cannot fit internally due to bay size restrictions. Specifically, they deploy the AGM-158C LRASM, a long-range anti-ship missile designed to crack high-value targets from a safe standoff distance. In this partnership, the Lincoln serves as the sensitive eye, while the Bush functions as the massive, heavy-hitting armory. We designate this tactical integration as the flush and crush doctrine of modern maritime warfare in the 21st century. The F-35C pushes forward into the anti-access area denial zone, flying passive and electronically silent to avoid detection. It soaks up every emission the enemy radar leaks, locating mobile launchers that remain invisible to space-based satellite assets. Crucially, the stealth jet does not fire, preserving its position and its limited internal magazine for self-defense if necessary. Instead, it transmits distinct targeting data via the tactical common data link at the speed of light to the rear echelon. This data jumps instantaneously to the heavyweights orbiting safely outside the enemy's maximum threat rings. The Super Hornets launch massive volleys from 400 miles out, guided by the forward-deployed stealth assets. The F-35 points the finger. The Super Hornet pulls the trigger with overwhelming kinetic force and volume. This is the triad of 2026. Lincoln as the sensor, F-15 as the anchor, and Bush as the hammer. Yet, CVN-77 possesses one more critical advantage, often overlooked by casual observers: raw, surplus electrical power generation. As the testbed for next-generation grids, the Bush generates a surplus of raw electrical power that older carriers cannot match. The Lincoln fights a zero-sum game to balance its energy budget for modern avionics and life support systems. The Bush needs that massive output for the silent electronic war raging alongside the kinetic missile exchange. Look closely at the escort ships, specifically the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the carrier in tight formation. Identify the muffin-top protrusions housing the AN/SLQ-32V7 SEWIP Block 3 system on the superstructure. Electronic warfare has shifted from passive listening and jamming to active, focused electronic violence against incoming threats. SEWIP Block 3 uses active electronically scanned array technology to fire concentrated microwave beams at specific targets. This shift is driven by the brutal, unsustainable economics of modern drone warfare in the Persian Gulf theater. A single SM-2 interceptor costs the American taxpayer roughly $2 million per individual launch. In contrast, an Iranian-made Shahed drone costs $20,000, creating a fatal cost imbalance for the defender. Shooting multi-million-dollar missiles at cheap drones ensures financial bankruptcy before the first week of combat ends. Directed energy changes the math, using electricity rather than limited kinetic ammunition to defeat the swarm. It fries the delicate guidance circuits of incoming drones instantly, creating an infinite magazine limited only by generator fuel. Offensively, CVN-77 launches the EA-18G Growler carrying the next-generation jammer mid-band pod for deep strikes. While older ALQ-99 pods acted like crude floodlights, the next-generation jammer acts like a precise electronic scalpel. It utilizes high-efficiency gallium nitride chips to pump unprecedented wattage into narrow-frequency bands to blind specific radars. This system does not merely block enemy radar, it rewrites the enemy's sensor reality in real time. The Growler inserts false targets, effectively generating a phantom fleet on Iranian scopes to confuse command decisions. It forces the adversary to waste expensive ammunition on electronic ghosts while the real strike package advances unharmed. However, the ultimate kinetic threat remains the Iranian Fateh, II hypersonic glide vehicle, a weapon designed to bypass these defenses. This weapon moves at Mach 15, too fast for traditional fire control loop calculations to track and engage effectively. Intercepting a maneuvering hypersonic target is like shooting a bullet with another bullet while wearing a blindfold. The physics of the encounter compress the reaction window to mere seconds, leaving no room for human error. To counter this, the Navy relies on the SM-6 Dual 2, a missile that changes the engagement logic entirely. It abandons the surgical hit-to-kill philosophy for a brutal area denial approach, detonating in the path of the threat. Instead of a direct impact, the SM-6 detonates a massive fragmentation warhead directly in the flight path of the incoming hypersonic weapon. It turns the empty sky into a lethal, suspended minefield of hypervelocity tungsten shrapnel designed to shred anything passing through it. The cloud shreds the delicate control surfaces of the Fateh, destroying its aerodynamics and sending it tumbling uncontrollably into the sea. While the air war rages above, the Bush fights a silent, high-stakes acoustic war deep below the waterline of the Gulf. Iranian Kilo-class submarines lurk in the thermal layers of the shallow, noisy waters, using the environment to mask their approach. Detection here is a nightmare due to high ambient noise from commercial traffic and complex salinity gradients that bend sonar waves. The ship's four massive bronze propellers feature a unique, classified blade geometry specifically engineered to counter this acoustic disadvantage. Naval engineers designed the specific curvature to significantly delay the onset of cavitation while the carrier operates at high cruising speeds. Instead of tearing the water and creating noisy vacuum bubbles, the blades slice through the medium with surgical hydrodynamic precision. This reduction in acoustic signature effectively halves the enemy's passive sonar detection radius, blinding them to the carrier's exact vector. It grants the escort destroyers precious additional minutes to triangulate a firing solution before the enemy submarine can launch its torpedoes. This capability is vital because the carrier is a high-value magnet for every heavyweight torpedo currently deployed in the region. The entire strike group operates as a single, integrated organism of steel and silicon, sharing data and defense in real time. But strip away the advanced sensors, the stealth coatings, and the network data links, and you are left with the hull. CVN-77 remains a Frankenstein of Cold War steel, experimental physics, and parasitic iron weights welded into its frame for stability. It drags its corrective mass through the water just to stay upright and fight, a testament to imperfect but necessary engineering. Deep within the ship's high-traffic corridors, far from the flight deck, lies a sealed chamber known to the crew as the tribute room. Here, time stands still, insulated from the digital chaos and screaming alarms of the Combat Direction Center one deck above. The room houses the original flight logs of Lieutenant George H.W. Bush from 944, preserved under heavy, bulletproof glass. It contains a highly detailed model of the TBM Avenger he flew into the teeth of Japanese defenses at Chichijima. This space is not a museum for tourists. It is a tactical anchor designed to ground the crew's morale in reality. It reminds 5,000 sailors that naval aviation is ultimately a game of visceral survival, not just video game blips. While technology evolves at a dizzying pace, the price of freedom remains a blood-stained constant across every generation of warfare. The USS Abraham Lincoln represents the sleek, invisible future of American power projection, operating in the shadows of the digital realm. It is the scalpel that operates with precision, relying on stealth and information dominance to achieve its objectives without being seen. But the USS George H.W. Bush represents the heavy, grinding reality of industrial warfare that refuses to be obsolete. It is the vessel that refuses to be ignored, intimidated, or sunk, regardless of the damage it sustains in combat. In the chaotic, hyperkinetic environment of 2026, you do not always want the surgeon to fight your battles for you. Sometimes, the mission profile demands the brawler who won't stay down, the fighter who brings mass to the fight. The strategic board is fully set, and the pieces are finally moving across the global map towards their endgame. The silence of the Persian Gulf is about to be shattered by the roar of afterburners and the impact of ordnance. The Lincoln provides the flash of lightning that blinds the enemy sensors and disrupts their command and control loop. The Bush provides the rolling thunder that follows, leveling the ground beneath them and destroying their capacity to wage war. Thunder has finally arrived in the CENTCOM area of responsibility, signaling the end of simple deterrence and the start of action. The era of the sanitized surgical strike is over. The era of raw industrial tonnage has returned to the forefront. The strategic calculus of the Persian Gulf has fundamentally shifted with this dual-carrier arrival and their complementary combat doctrines. We are witnessing the integration of fifth-generation stealth capabilities with 20th-century industrial resilience in a single theater of operations. The Abraham Lincoln forces the adversary to keep their radars off to survive the suppression of enemy air defense's mission. The George H.W. Bush forces them to turn their radars on to track the incoming mass of cruise missiles and strike aircraft. This creates a lethal dilemma: transmit and die by the scalpel, or remain silent and die by the hammer. It is a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario engineered by naval planners to break the enemy's will. If you respect the cold engineering of these titans, you understand the gravity of the deployment currently unfolding in the Gulf. This is not a diplomatic gesture. It is a logistical ultimatum parked off the coast, waiting for the order to execute. The media will continue to sanitize these movements with safe, diplomatic platitudes about regional stability and freedom of navigation. They will sell you the narrative of routine exercises and stability operations to keep the public calm and the market stable. But here at Navy Decoded, we strip away the propaganda to reveal the hard vectors of conflict and the physics of war. We run the math that the sanitized press releases are too afraid to publish for fear of alarming the general population. The arrival of the variable X completes the strategic equation for the year 2026, balancing the scales of power. It proves that despite the hype of hypersonic missiles, tonnage and sustainability still rule the waves in a prolonged conflict. The soul of the ship, forged in the Pacific in 1944, is now the anchor of the Gulf in 2026. Lieutenant Bush's visceral survival instinct has been physically scaled up to 100,000 tons of American sovereignty. We demand you look past the sanitized headlines and analyze the hull geometry yourself to understand the true stakes. If you value deep intelligence over shallow reporting, toggle your personal transponder to the own position immediately. Acknowledge this transmission by engaging with the frequency below to join the watch and track the fleet. Prove that critical thinking still matters in an era defined by fleeting digital attention spans and algorithmic distractions. This deep dive investigation into the logistics of the modern carrier strike group is now officially concluded. We have exposed the critical runway vulnerability at Al Udeid and the structural fragility of the desert airbases. We have calculated the magazine depth limits of the F-35C and the exhaustion point of its internal bays. We have revealed the variable X corrective mass solution that balances the equation of the Persian Gulf theater. The strategic board is set, the pieces are locked in motion, and the clock is ticking down to zero. We will continue to monitor the telemetry of the Gulf in real time as the situation evolves toward kinetic action. Stay vigilant against the narrative spin that seeks to pacify the public while the war machine gears up. Stay informed about the kinetic realities that dictate the outcome of battles, regardless of political posturing. And always remember, the soul of the ship is just as critical as the high tensile steel that carries it. The variable X has made its final approach to the theater of operations, closing the logistical loop. The dual carrier formation now represents the complete spectrum of American warfare, from the digital to the industrial. One carrier hides in the noise, whispering death to the enemy's electronic ears with high-tech precision. The other carrier screams into the silence, promising destruction with the weight of history behind its keel. This is the balance of power in 2026, a synthesis of the invisible blade and the unbreakable shield. The adversaries watching from the shoreline must now calculate the cost of testing this combined resolve. Every sensor in the region is currently saturated, trying to distinguish between the ghost and the machine. The window for diplomacy is closing as fast as the distance between the fleets and their targets. What happens next will not be decided by press conferences, but by the performance of these systems under stress. The math has been run, the variables have been accounted for, and the solution is now floating on the horizon. You have been briefed on the capabilities, the flaws, and the desperate engineering required to keep the peace. Knowledge is the only weapon that cannot be jammed, intercepted, or shot down by an enemy missile. Carry this intelligence with you as the headlines begin to change in the coming days and weeks. When the breaking news alerts flash, you will know the mechanics behind the movement of the steel. You will understand why the Avenger was sent to the front lines despite its broken, listing body. You will recognize the silence of the Times Lincoln Times as the prelude to the thunder of the Times Bush asterisk. The narrative of the Persian Gulf is being rewritten, not with ink, but with wake turbulence and radar pulses. Navy Decoded will remain on station, analyzing the signal amidst the noise of the impending conflict. We do not offer comfort, we offer the cold, hard clarity of unclassified logistical analysis. The friction of war is about to test the theories of the Pentagon planners against the reality of physics. Will the corrective mass hold the ship upright when the shockwaves of the first impact hit the hull? Will the stealth coating of the F-35 survive the abrasive sandstorms of the Arabian Peninsula deployment? These are the questions that keep the watchstanders awake in the red glow of the combat centers. The answers are approaching at 30 knots, cutting through the warm waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Prepare yourselves for the shift from deterrence to engagement, from posturing to performance. The variable X is no longer a theoretical reserve, it is the active variable in the equation. The integration is complete, the data links are solid, and the weapons are free to engage. This is the end of the brief, but it is only the beginning of the operation. Maintain your situational awareness and keep your eyes on the horizon where the sea meets the sky. We're watching the same chessboard, but now you can see the invisible moves being made. Thank you for decoding the signal and standing watch with us during this critical window. The transmission is ending, but the surveillance of the high seas continues without pause. This is Navy Decoded, signing off from the logistical deep dive of the 2026 Gulf scenario. Variable X is on station. Thunder is rolling.